Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iturrate, and the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Welcome back to the Lights On Podcast. I am the MMA Detective, Mike Davis. Along with me, as always, Miguel Iturrate. And Miguel, another edition of Mixed Martial Artifacts. Ed Thiessen, what are we displaying today, buddy?
Today we're going to display the walk-in cape that Scott Ferrozzo wore in UFC 8 against his fight against Jerry Bohlander. This fight was called David versus Goliath, and I think we know who Goliath is in this one.
So the UFC at this point, I think the Ken Shamrock purple cape, I'm not sure which one. I want to say the purple cape predated this, but this cape in all of its glory is within itself amazing. It's a bulldog, like on the back, airbrushed. I think it was like submitting a guy with like some sort of arm lock, and
it's kind of like ripping skin right off the guy's back.
Yeah,
biting into him, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, some would say it's a little strange, but neither here nor there. And then on the front, it says, "Fear me." So, an amazing piece. Miguel, I mean, with Bohlander, Ferrozzo, what do you recall about that fight and the buildup?
Well, we're in ancient territory here again. UFC 8 was in Puerto Rico. And, Puerto Rico in and of itself is a strange place to show up this early on in the UFC's career that, it's kind of a wild place going back to like the pro wrestling days and stuff like that, where, you got to be careful down there. And they pulled off a major tournament. Ferrozzo, you've been calling out Tank Abbott. I think he attended UFC 6 and was, trying to get the Abbott match. He came into this tournament as part of obviously on the Goliath side, and didn't get past Bohlander. Gave Bohlander, some damage.
Oh, of a run.
For some time there, but we ran into like a brawler against what was beginning to be a real pro fighter in Bohlander, and it showed here. I think when we interviewed Scott took it as a learning experience, and he knew what he wanted to do in the fight business. He had a goal and things like that. I think this was a learning lesson. I think this is a wake-up call for a lot of the fans in the early days where, Bohlander, the eventual winner of the tournament, was Fry, another one of the Davids. The little guys, the skill was beginning to show.
Really pick up.
That you do have to know what you're doing in there.
Yeah. So Tank, or I should say Scott Ferrozzo, wore a wrestling singlet. That is what you need to track down, Ed Thiessen. That black wrestling singlet. And when Jerry was getting slammed and manhandled and beat up, just bullied by Scott Ferrozzo. And, later on in the fight, much later on in the fight, Jerry got his hands wrapped around the singlet straps and used that to choke out Scott Ferrozzo. It was just an amazing thing of ingenuity at the time. I remember at home watching it live. It made me a Jerry Bohlander mark. I'm not even going to lie about that. So a fantastic piece. Ed, how did you come about this?
I actually bought this from a guy down in Ohio that was the promoter of the fight, the backyard fight between Scott Ferrozzo and Tank Abbott.
Grooms. Was it Grooms?
Brian Grooms.
Brian Grooms.
Brian Grooms.
Okay. Man, I have no idea why I know that. Okay. So you got it from Brian Grooms. And in our interview with Ferrozzo, I think he said he paid almost like $2,000 to have that airbrushed on there.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy duty cape.
Yeah, he looks like a giant potato chip bag.
He does.
This is kind of like the cartoon era of the UFC, where, I mean, even from the beginning, it really was, with guys are larger than life characters, and Ferrozzo certainly fell into that category.
Yeah.
Do you guys know how Ferrozzo got into the UFC? So in essence, he was selling toy robots, and he had some collector from the East Coast sending him just boxes of cash, like sometimes $15,000, $20,000 worth of cash. And at that time, Scott asks him, "What do you do for a living?" And he said, "Oh, I'm in the pay-per-view industry." And Ferrozzo asked him if he knew the UFC guys. And he said, "Well, yeah, I'm really good friends with them." So Ferrozzo at this exact same time is watching the UFC pay-per-views and from the couch telling his wife, "Yeah, I could beat that guy. Yeah, I could beat that guy." And, his main goal of entering the UFC was beating up Tank Abbott. So we got a guy that from his couch, just through the weird set of circumstances, winds up in the UFC. And, he came fully prepared. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that piece is fantastic. I like capes. I like trophies. And this is one, in my opinion, this and the Ken Shamrock purple cape. I mean, that's top class right there. I think a poster on the internet named Bob Sapp fan, he has the Ken Shamrock purple cape. But, man, this is a fantastic piece.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, Ed, where do you keep this? Where do you store this thing? How do you put it away? Or is it actually hanging in your closet? Like, do you bust out with the cape every once in a while?
Oh, my old lady.
I just basically have it in a Tupperware container, and I leave the lid loose so it doesn't get moist. I try to do the best I can do to preserve this stuff. So I don't hang it in the closet. It would take up the whole closet.
And if this was in my house, those special nights for my wife, I'd be coming out of the closet wearing this for sure.
Well, you never know.
Oh, and you know what? In our interview with Scott Ferrozzo, he had said he would love to buy it back.
Yeah, I heard him say that.
Yeah.
But I think you'd like to see it in a museum someday too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had said whatever Scott would pay, I'll pay $1 more. I think that was my response. So anyway, Ed, thank you so much. This is I'm a huge Ferrozzo fan. I know he was a small footnote in the early UFCs, and he made an indelible mark on that of myself. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next week. Yeah, absolutely. We will have another episode of Mixed Martial Artifacts.
Check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.